Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to be talking about level 2 of the CCSS. We'll be doing more of a deep dive here. So we have some experts on our panel so that we can make sure that we get into everything we need to for you to discuss. We probably won't get into every single requirement just because there are so many, but we'll give a good overview of it. But first, let's start with introductions. I'm Jessica Levesque. I'm C4's Executive Director. And I was just telling everyone on this call, I just had a dream about the CCSS, so I'm ready to go. Let's start with intros. Mark, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. My name is Mark Christianis. I'm a CCSA and also a member of the CCSS Steering Committee.
Perfect. All right, let's go, Jaco.
Thanks, Jess. I'm Jaco Jansen van Rensburg. I'm IT Manager for Provenance Compliance and a more recently certified CCSSA. Yeah, looking forward to the session.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us. Ilya?
Hi everyone, I'm Ilya. I spent the last 10 years working in crypto security, and now I am security architect at a digital asset custody company. Excited to be part of the panel today.
Perfect. We're glad that you joined. All right, Daniel?
I'm Daniel. I work as a blockchain consultant at TY and recently certified as a CCSS auditor, and also excited to join this session.
Very nice. All right, Sharnay, last but not least.
Thanks, Jess. Hi, everyone. My name is Sharnay van Heerden. I'm head of audit at Provenance, focus on a bit of wider internal audits, AML, and also specifically CCSS. I'm also a CCSSA and recently part of the steering committee. So glad to be here.
All right. I'm so glad we have smart people on our call who are experienced at the CCSS who will walk us through some of these requirements. So as a little background, the way that the CCSS works is that each level builds upon each other. So we previously did a level 1 deep dive where we went into some of the level 1 requirements, but in order to be certified at a level 2, you need to first meet all of the level 1 requirements. So it builds on top of each other, and then same thing, level 3, you'll have to do all of the level 2 requirements. So it's this is right smack dab in the middle. And as Sharnay said to me the other day, it's kind of fun to talk about level 2 because maybe that one gets left behind because we're more focused on the foundational and then what the extreme side of it is. So we're going to go through some of the down the middle requirements. All right, let's get into it. Why don't we start at the beginning a bit and get into key material generation. This is where things kind of start. So you obviously have to generate a key to then be able to store it and access it and all of those things. So one of the first things that we talk about is how to validate the generation methodology. So that is 1.01.2. And Daniel, do you want to walk us through what this looks like at a level 2?
Yes, of course. This requirement actually has two parts. First of all, we need to test, to simulate our key material generation runbook to see everything is fine. And on the second hand, the requirement says we should avoid any features that could exfiltrate or restrict the key generation mechanisms. Needless to say, we don't want any features, libraries, or plugins to introduce backdoors or things like that in our key generation mechanisms. So we should check that carefully too.
Yep, absolutely. Anybody want to add anything to that requirement or that aspect? No? Daniel, anything else on your end?
I think that's it. Just wanted to add that, of course, we can use some libraries or plugins only if these are official plugins that add an extra security layer to the key generation mechanism. If that's
Yep.
the case, this could be okay.
Yep. And one of the interesting things is, and I don't know if I already said this, there are no requirements, level 1 or level 2 requirements in this specific aspect control. So smack dab in the middle. Okay, so let's get into, now we've talked a little bit about how to generate keys. Let's talk about how we generate wallets, because once you've got the key, you need the wallets to use the keys and vice versa. So let's talk a little bit about single signer mechanisms. And if you're using single signer, first of all, we say single signer and multi-signer mechanisms versus what we generally hear, which is like multi-sig, single sig. So same general idea. Just wanted to put that out before we get into it. Sharnay, do you want to walk us through signing configurations?
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Jess. So yeah, the signing configuration we're talking about, this is also something that has recently been added to version 9 to make, allowance for that. We always go for multi-signer mechanisms because that is considered best practice. But while it is considered best practice, that's not always feasible in your operations. It impacts the speed at which funds can be managed. So, but the main requirement or the rationale, the risk that I see with regarding this and why this requirement is in the standard is just to make sure that you have considered all the aspects when you decided to go for a single signer. Did you check the criticality of the wallet, the impact of the loss, where is the majority of your client's funds? And I don't want to jump too far into the risk aspect or management thereon, because I know Mark will touch a bit on that later. But I think the main with regards to this is, did you think properly about it? Not just operational, but from a risk perspective, where does your risk lie? Yeah, so that's that.
That was a really good overview. I don't think this is the one Mark calls the big kahuna. So for those watching, during our CCSS trainings, whenever we get to the one with like the max amount of criteria that's included in a requirement, he calls it the big kahuna. But this is the little kahuna, I guess, because it's also a requirement that has a number of criteria within it, as you just heard Sharnay talk about. So we're looking at the criticality of the wallet. First, which would, the criticality of the wallet is how important it is to operations, how important that specific wallet is. And I think that kind of then guides the rest of them. And Sharnay, like you said, Mark will talk about risk in a little bit. And maybe we'll come back to some of these requirements as well once we talk a little bit more about that. And then again, this aspect control signing configuration has no level 1 or level 3 requirements. And it's interesting, when I was going through the agenda, I don't think I'd ever done it in this way, where I separated it out and just reviewed it in this way. It was interesting, the number of requirements that are level 2 that don't have a 1 or a 3. Did anyone else, were you guys surprised by that, or was that something you were already aware of?
No, definitely surprised, and especially because 1.02, it's straight a level 2 requirement. Everything that flows from starting with your signer configuration, it's all, level 2. So I think that might be surprising for people, that a whole aspect might not be necessarily relevant for the baseline, the fundamentals.
Yeah, and I know our committee has talked about that, because there are no level 1 requirements in wallet generation. And I remember years ago, I was initially surprised by that and brought it up, and it actually does make sense why it's like that. So anyways, a lot of thought that went into this, but it is interesting to look at it from that perspective. So let's go into another wallet generation requirement at level 2. Ilya, do you want to talk a little bit about key material redundancy with us?
Okay. Okay. Key redundancy is really very important to implement this mechanism, because I see many times when you have one one signer, or maybe multi-party computation signer with two scheme, and if something happens bad, maybe denial of service or some problems with another signer, your system was down in one moment. You have no chance to do something in this situation. But if you have redundancy key, you can launch another signing node, and okay, you are well, it's no big problem. Another very important fact that if you need somebody who can control your key, I mean about notary. If you need some trust third-party system who need control part of your key, if your partner lay off or maybe go out from your business, you need somebody who can help you to save your business, to save your money. And with him, with recovery key, redundant key, help you in this situation too. In my practice, we have some clients who ask about this because you start a business with two people, and in one moment it will be different business, different life story, and you need somebody who can help you to restore your money, to restore your funds without communication with your ex-partner.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this requirement, and I think, multi-signer mechanisms in general, is that they serve more than one purpose, right? There's that security feature in terms of making sure that one person isn't signing it, right? We can set it up so that we've got multiple people or multiple setups so that it's not in control in one place. And then also the second part of having that redundant key for recovery. So it does two things kind of. Yeah, and that is in opposition a little bit to what Charnay was talking about, because she was talking about single signer, and this is the multi-signer part. But you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but a system could be using both of these for different keys, right? It's not necessarily one or the other. When you do an audit, they could be using multiple different configurations, right? Mark, I saw you nod a little bit too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure we know it's not one or the other. It's oftentimes both things. Okay, anyone want to add anything to that, the signing configuration and key material redundancy for single sig or multi-sig? Shoot, I just said that that's not how we say it, and then I ended up doing it anyways. It's so funny how this lingo just becomes embedded in us. And I can promise you the discussion of changing those terms was a big one in the steering committee. Okay. So
we wanted to future-proof the standard a bit more, because in version 8.1, the previous version of the standard, we did say multi-sig, and we were thinking about technology that hasn't even been invented yet, and we didn't want to get in a position where we'd have to update the standard every year because it's quite a bit of effort. So it's one of our future-proofing terms that we've used, which is single signer. And that's basically, when you think about it, instead of saying single signature, instead you're saying single signer. It also gives you the scope to have the signing mechanism separated from the authorization as well, because there's some architectures where the authorization is actually not part of the wallet layer, it's actually higher up. So you could have key custodians approve a transaction outside or a higher level than the wallet, and then maybe the transaction is just signed by one private key. So that's basically, you'll see it in version 9, we've done a lot of future proofing of the terminology.
I have one interesting example in my practice. We have the system who operate by different team of operators, but we need only one private key in the system to sign the transaction, and we can organize that. We have a lot of recovery key, redundant key, and split it between different group. And for example, if person A now in vacation, we can ask person B use this part of the key. And we was very flexible in this situation. If we use only one person and one key, it will be very difficult for us to implement our system. But with a Lancer key, it's very flexible.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
point.
Yep, that was a good add. Okay, so we talked a little bit about generating the keys and the wallets, but another part of the wallet generation process is geographic key material. So let's talk about this aspect control and the requirement connected to it. Daniel, do you want to get us started on that one?
Yes, sure. This requirement may sound a bit abstract. What do we mean by geographic key material distribution? Because this could be different cities, different countries, different streets within the same city.
I thought you were going to say different worlds, and I was like, yes, we're going in aliens. Okay, sorry. Keep
Not for
going.
now. Not for now. We aren't still in Mars, nor in the moon, but we will see. That will be the best scenario for key material geographic distribution. But for now, let's keep it simple. I think there's no a single answer to this question. Maybe there will be some scenarios in which storing the keys in the same city may be acceptable if we have evaluated the different risks like flooding, earthquake, fire. So we would say these keys are in the same city, but there has been a risk evaluation, threat modeling, and there are no significant risks, so that a threat affects to two keys simultaneously. So I think that's the main consideration when answering how to distribute the keys geographically.
Mm-hmm.
Is he
Charnay?
also
Oh, yeah.
Taco, you go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Jaco.
I'll just add to Daniel's perspective and emphasize that I think it's really about the risk mitigation at the end of the day, right? So you are mitigating those risks associated with the relevant geographic locations. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
That was a good point for sure. Mark, were you going to add to that too?
Well, I think we have it at different locations, and we don't actually say whether that means a country or a city or a different planet. It's actually taking into account the fact that in some jurisdictions, regulators require that key materials remains in the country. So this is where we have again just this more high level wording of our requirements, so we can accommodate these special requirements, especially from regulators when they have these types of rules as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, I think that AWS is the good solution to solve this problem. We can use a key management system in AWS and set up in different places, different location in Europe and Asia, in USA, without problem. I think it's a good way to implement it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Technology is so cool. Really is. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's easy when using these software-based cloud providers, but it becomes trickier when using more manual setups.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. All right. So now we've talked about key generation and wallet generation. So we've got the keys, we've got the wallets. What do we do with them? Let's talk about where we're storing them a little bit and how. And Mark, do you want to get us started on key material storage. How are we storing our keys, or how should we be storing our keys?
Well, I mean, there's lots of ways to store things. And again, it also comes back to risk as well. But one of the key requirements that we have is that a backup's got to exist in the first place. So it's a pretty fundamental concept, but we have to put something like this in the standard just to ensure that backups do exist. Of the audits that I've done, I've never really had a client that hasn't got a backup of key material. And again, it can be on paper, digital, metal, what have you. But the fact is that there is a requirement that says backups need to exist. And the other one too is where we move into the geographical separation of the backup to the operational key material. So in CCSS, we talk about keys that are actually used or ready to be used as operational key material. And so the backups are actually backups of operational key material. So you'll notice in the standard, there's a bit of a distinction between some requirements are focused on operational key material, some are focused on the backups containing operational key material, and some requirements cover all key material as well. So in the case of geographical separation, this is again where we need to understand the risks involved, the environmental risks and so forth, of where do we actually keep the backups and how far away from the operational key material. For example, if there is a disaster, do we actually have to go to another country to get the backups if they're, physical backups and so forth? So it's one of those things where you'll see a lot of requirements in CCSS covering backups.
Well, it's interesting that you said, and I saw Sharnay nod too, that you've never seen anybody who didn't have the backups in an audit. And I would guess that's because people who run organizations that are audit ready for, their systems are audit ready, probably recognize how important this is. We know in the news, we hear stories about companies that didn't do that. So it definitely is something that's happening in the industry that's pretty scary, but the more mature or security focused organizations definitely are doing that, thankfully.
Yeah. And the other requirement too is focusing on actually having the ability to see whether the backups are tampered with. So what we would say here, tamper evident mechanism. So in pre-version 9, we used to say maybe, tamper evident bag or container and so forth, but we wanted to put in here, and again, this goes back to future-proofing the standard. We call it a tamper evident mechanism because we need to also know whether electronic or electronically stored backups have been tampered with. So it's, we understand the general physical tampering where someone basically opens up a bag and has a look at the seed phrase on a metal plate. And if it's that metal plate's in a tamper evident bag, then obviously we can see the bag's been tampered with. But the whole thing comes back to, well, what happens if the backups are stored electronically? How do we actually know that the backups have been tampered with? And so this is why we have this level of abstraction with our wording where we actually just have tamper evident mechanism, because like if the backups are stored in an S3 bucket, how are you going to work out whether those backups have been tampered with?
One of the interesting things about the CCSS, I think, is that it's also really useful for individuals that self-custody or hold their own crypto assets. And I would suggest people who are doing this also take a look at what this requirement I think is really important. So obviously have backups, but from like a large organizational perspective, it's more likely to be using something like AWS or some way that you have the keys, electronically stored and have some type of logs and monitoring to make sure there isn't the malicious activity. But as individuals, this is something we should all be doing as well. If you do store your own crypto, if you have your own wallets, is making sure that you have a backup, but then you also have that physical tamper evident seal of some sort so that if somebody has access to that. That's an easy way to increase your security posture as an individual that's also doing this in the safe. So I just want to, doing this in the space. I think that it's just useful to recognize that the standard can be utilized in different ways. And that's one of the reasons that we have it free and anybody can look at it on our website, because we want to make the crypto space safer overall. Okay, but let's go back to the focus of organizations storing their crypto safely. So we've got some idea about how to store things safely. Anybody want to make any other comments on the level 2 requirements for key material storage before we move forward?
Yeah, hey, one comment. I very like one conception from HSM. The name is the key out of the box. When we generate the key in KMS and HSM, in the AWS, or maybe in our software, after generation the key, we encrypt this key with our master key and export from system to backup or to transfer to the owner of the key. Doesn't matter. And in this moment, we can do nothing with this key. We already encrypt it. We can put it to some storage, put it to backup, and we have protect this key from not authorized user. And it's very easy because I see so many times when key was in database, and in one moment, some DevOps team create backups mechanism and copy this key to another storage, and this storage may be in another place, and everybody forgot about this. We have no controls. But if we encrypt this key in first stage, in first step, we can solve this problem.
Yeah. That's a good example.
Yes.
Okay, so reorientating ourselves. Reorienting? I don't know. It's early for me. So we're talking about key generation, wallet generation, and then once we've got that, how we store it. And the next logical step is how we access that key material. So if it's too accessible, it's problematic. If it's not accessible enough, it's also problematic. So there's a fine line between making sure that you're secure and you haven't become so secure you can't use your keys. So Sharni, do you want to walk us through level 2 with how we access things, what we should be doing?
Yes, definitely. You touch around on most of the basics, like how do you access it? Too accessible, that's an issue. If it's not that accessible, that's also an issue. And where the level 2 requirement comes in, I know level 1 focus on specifically the measures regard that, the checklist, who can get access, etc. And if you dive a bit deeper into level 2, it's specifically on the approved communication channels of which those requests are,
And I actually, sorry, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, you
Yes.
blinked out for
Yeah,
1
yeah.
second, but you're back.
Yeah, sorry guys, headphones not
It
working
always
today.
happens, right? As soon as you're on a live stream, it goes out.
Exactly. So this is actually interesting because I saw someone comment on the LinkedIn post when we shared this live stream, and this person said the jump from level 1 to level 2 is where you stop trusting judgment and start enforcing it through design. Approved channels sound procedural, but they fundamentally change how teams operate. And I think that is so important because you have all these controls, you know who should have access to key material or even environments that can compromise the security of that key material. But how do you make sure of the identities of that communicating parties? And we keep on seeing on LinkedIn, on the news, I mean, social engineering and impersonation attacks is moving up quite a bit. I know, it's a lot in the news. So that is definitely, if that channels in which you communicate these requests are not controlled or established, attackers can impersonate internal staff, or fake instructions can come through, which might result in like inadvertently key exposure. So I think that is actually, it looks like move a bit away from the technical requirements, then sometimes people tend to focus a bit less on that. But I think it is fundamentally important. I always say, like, security is not just keys and cryptography, it's also how us as humans communicate that decisions, or even your systems with AI and stuff getting in. But yeah, that I don't know if anyone has something to add on that.
Well, you brought up AI, so we've got a million things to add on to that now, or at least I do. Does anyone else want to jump in first to talk about the approved communication channels before I take us down the AI path briefly? No? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I think technically it's really a big problem, because we need check the identity in the same place where is our key. And if you use any third-party KMS system like AWS KMS or HSM or something, you have no idea how to control identity when we use the key. We need some separate. We can, in one place we control identity, in one place we have the key. And maybe we can broken the trust between these 2 points. We trust the identity and we call the key management system. And maybe somebody can try to call KMS without check the identity. It's a really big technical problem.
Mm-hmm. We hear about SIM swapping and all kinds of things that people do to get access, and it can also be more simple. Just if someone isn't aware that you have to use certain channels and they get a random text from their boss or who they believe is their boss, and they move things around. So it can get really complicated or simple with this requirement, but all attack vectors are important to look at. So let's not go too down the rabbit hole, but let's just geek out for maybe like a minute or two about how AI really can impact this in terms of not just what kind of communication channels, but what they're doing with those channels. So, Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about what you would need to focus on, or at least be aware of, now that AI has the deep fakes and all the other stuff, why this is even more important right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's tools available now that if you're on a video call, these tools will basically scan the video stream for any indicators of AI use. The other thing too is obviously out of bound communication channels as well, right? So if an authorization comes through on email, then it needs to be verified in another communication channel, maybe a phone call or so forth. I think with the AI, it's just going to get more and more sophisticated, and I think there will probably be a stage where there would have to be some type of biometric or something that will need to be involved in terms of proving who you are. And even that might still not be, protected well enough. But I think with the approved communication channels, I think there might be a stage where we might need 2 or 3 out of band confirmations to see if someone is real. But I think biometrics is probably going to creep in a bit more, and possibly also maybe even having something that's not video but real time as well in terms of calls and so forth. I don't know. It's a bit scary, to be honest with you.
I mean, yeah, it's always interesting, scary, fun when you're adding a new technology. Well, I guess it's not new, but the new capabilities of this technology into what's already considered a newer technology, right? So people are still catching up with how to store crypto safely. And now they're catching up with new attack vectors constantly, including AI, which is kind of changing the game in many ways as well. So you're not just learning one thing, you're learning many things as you move forward with multiple types of tech. And to recall, just because you're not using something like that in your system doesn't mean that the attackers aren't using it in theirs. So even if it's not something that is you see as part of your system, somebody else may be using that as a way to get into your system. That was kind of vague, but I hope that made sense in terms of what we need to be aware of.
Well,
Anybody?
It's not just the hackers too. I mean, internally, when you think about, for example, on LinkedIn today, there was someone promoting a tool that basically allows you to connect Claude to LinkedIn, with permissions to basically communicate with your connections and so forth. So if you imagine the amount of connectors that are being created for AI to connect into your existing systems, obviously, if you look at Slack or some of the other chat applications, I'm sure there's connectors for Claude or ChatGPT already in existence. So when you have an approved communication channel, you also need to look at, well, is AI in some form connected, has permissions and can connect to these chat applications? And what does that mean in terms of another attack factor as well?
Yeah, and then they're storing information potentially. So that's another place that you have to just be aware of, or where they're retrieving information to pull it in from. Okay, let's kind of get away from this angle, though we probably talk about it all day, and get back to focusing on some of the other requirements. So one of the other things with the approved communication channel, it ties into key material usage as well, and making sure that when you're using the cryptocurrency that you're verifying spend. So another level 2 requirement, 1.05.8.1, is just making sure that somebody or something has verified the fund destinations and amounts using one of those approved communication channels before actually using the key material. So we're aware of the entire life cycle of keys, and there actually is not an additional requirement for data sanitization for this. For data sanitization, there's not a level 2 requirement, but that is something that would happen in level 1 that would need to be a part of an audit if you're going for level 2. I just didn't want to leave out the data sanitization part. Okay, that was all the cryptographic asset management requirements we're going to cover for level 2, but don't worry, we've got more. We've got the operations requirements as well. So before we get into that, actually, Mark, will you briefly explain the difference between, or anybody else if you want to, the cryptographic asset management category and the operations category? Why do we have them separate?
So CCSS has, at the highest level of its hierarchy, is 2 categories. So we have the life cycle of key material. So that's the first category. And it covers everything: key creation, key use, key storage, key backups, key destruction. So this is so the first category covers that, the entire life cycle of key material. And then we have the second category, which we call operations. And these are requirements that provide support for a key material in various stages of its life cycle. And so we really focus on operational aspects, from log management to governance, risk, things that basically are supporting key material.
Okay, thank you for that. So now that we have put our minds into the operational side of things, let's talk about security tests and audits. Jaco, do you want to get us started with what we're doing in level 2 with security tests and audits?
Yeah, sure, Jess. So I strongly believe this will tie in with your secure development lifecycle and your secure development practices. So a level 2 deep dive for the security development and documentation aspect would be then to have regular security assessments that include your vulnerability scanning or assessment and any penetration testing that's been done. And that needs to be done by an independent qualified third party. So that's a bit of a deeper dive. It's not just by a security personnel internally, but in this instance, for level 2 requirement, independence is quite important, and obviously qualified third party. And then also to have documentation that shows the assessments that was done, vulnerabilities found, and also the security patching that was done or the remediation that was done. So yeah, I think it's very important in the continuously evolving threat landscape to do those regular assessments. And also it will also then show that you are continuously improving on your security and applying those security hardenings as well. So yeah, it's not a once done and you're done with it. You need to continuously be fighting these AI threats that we've also mentioned before.
Mm-hmm. That was a really good explanation overview of this part. I think one of the interesting pieces is the difference between level 1 and level 2. And what you just said, level 2 is the regular security assessment, and that it's by someone external. Does anyone have any examples, references, things you want to talk about in terms of the difference between this level 1 requirement with having an internal expert within, InfoSec or something in that area versus an external third party? Is that something in audits that we see is often a big gap, or what does that look like in practice? I'll wait a moment.
I think it's typical when a custody team develops a lot of features and has a lot of developers and owns its own code. I think it's typical and it's an industry best practice to make this pen testing, this external security testing, apart from any internal security tests, quality assurance the internal team does. I think it's very important to have this third-party view. And also, regarding the regular thing, the frequency of this pen testing, the standard is not 100% clear here. It just says regular. Again, what's regular? It could be yearly, but if we have a big change, big new feature in the code, in the platform, maybe we need a security testing twice a year or 3 times a year. So it also depends.
Yep. Yeah. And yeah, regular is in the glossary. It's one of those terms that it comes up, seems vague, and then it's in the glossary to define it. All right. So one other thing I want to point out is I was thinking about it like an example of this with having someone external. If you think about like a book, a novel, whatever, somebody writes it, and then you usually have somebody external do the edits. They hire an external editor. It's really hard to grade your own work because you've already seen what you've seen, and you need someone to approach it from a different perspective. And not to say that the internal audit side of things isn't valuable. It absolutely is. But when we're talking about taking it to the next level, when we consider that extra set of eyes, it's a good way to, potentially recognize more issues that would have been overlooked. Okay.
And plus the third party, when you have an external third party, such as penetration testers, they've normally gone through and obviously done a lot of penetration testing on different systems. So their experience is not just your platform, but across many other different types of platforms. So they'd probably more than likely be able to spot things that your own internal teams aren't aware of, because the internal teams are so used to their same platform that things get missed as well. And obviously politics, internal politics and timelines and all types of goings on in the internal organization means that some things can be forgotten about or brushed over and so forth. Whereas if you have an independent third party, normally when you look at the penetration testing reports or the smart contract code audit reports, there's normally a section in those reports that basically what we call cover your butt clause, where the third party will basically say, well, we did this penetration test, and but unfortunately only 50% of the code was given to us. So it keeps entities honest as well when you engage with third parties, because when they do these reports, they want to basically make sure that if there's any restrictions to what they need to do, then it's actually put into the report as well.
Yeah, that's a
Absolutely.
very valid point, Mark.
Yep. All right. So we've talked about doing these tests and audits, but we also need to log and monitor what's going on. So Jaco, will you walk us through some of the log and monitor requirements focused on level 2?
Yeah, sure. So again, I think logging, you first need to log all the relevant events to be able to get some visibility on it. So you need to log it in order to monitor it, and that gives you the necessary visibility. And visibility is very important within your trusted environment, within the space. And the deeper dive then for level 2 would be on the audit logs that's getting logged, would be for all actions to be performed, that to be logged for actions performed by all the users. So it's not just logging a subset of actions performed in your environment by some users and some actions. It's now for all actions performed by all users. And then you can retain those logs for at least a year to be able to go back and review those logs, because you might not necessarily need to or identify a risk or some exposure or some incident within a short period. So at least to have those logs and that visibility to go back on within a year. Yeah, that's what I'll add there for now.
I like that you really focused on the visibility over time and the need to be able to look back to see what has been happening and how effective that can be as a way to mitigate risk. Okay.
Yeah, no,
so-
sorry, it also ties in with Mark's previous comments on the evident or the tamper evident management. We want to log those actions and actually be then able to alert on it. You need to monitor it as well, which is the next component.
That's such a good point. These all tie into each other. I'm glad you brought that up, Jaco, because one requirement doesn't just sit separately. They all kind of interweave together to make the system safer and safer the more things you add on and reflect against each other with the risk assessment and all of that. Yep. Okay, what else do we need to talk about with log and monitor? Jaco, anybody else can jump in as well. What else? Anything?
The only
Okay.
other thing I would add also with your audit logs that you need to back up is obviously you also want to back that up to a separate environment. Again, from a risk mitigation perspective, and making sure that you can actually go back and review those audit logs if necessary. So then the audit log backup requirement would be to at least annually back up to a separate server or separate environment as an added security step.
Yeah. There's also flexibility. Because we have training for auditors and implementers, part of the training for both certifications is just understanding the wording of the requirement. because like if we can see here, we talk about audit logs are retained for at least 1 year in a trusted environment. Now, if anyone who's dealt with Splunk or some of the more expensive SIEMs out there, that's a lot of logs to retain in a SIEM, right? Especially if you're being charged by retention size and so forth. So with the CCSAs and the CCSIs, the implementers, there is scope for that, because what we can look at here is it's going to be a lot of space needed to store hundreds of millions of log event records, right? If you're retaining something for a year. So what we can look at here is maybe have the first 3 months, the most recent 3 months kept in SIEM, kept in Splunk or Alien Vault, whatever you want, or in AWS. And then the other 9 months can be put into more colder storage, so to speak. So it takes a little bit more time to pull those records out after 3 months. But the most recent 3 months is actually still there, readily available as well. So when you look at some of these requirements, it's important not to freak out and think, well, how much is it going to cost me to retain a year's worth of audit logs in my SIEM? So just be aware that the auditors and the implementers are trained to understand the wording of the requirement, and there's a lot of flexibility in some of these requirements.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Mark. It's a good point. Okay, anything else we want to talk about with log and monitoring, Jaco? Anybody else? You good? Okay. All right. So let's get into risk. We've been skirting around this quite a bit since we started because, like we said, it interconnects with a bunch of the other requirements. So, Mark, do you want to get us into governance and risk and level 2 requirement about risk management?
Version 9, we brought in the whole governance aspect. There wasn't any type of risk management or threat modeling in the previous version 8.1. We brought this in because what we wanted to do with the standard going forward, starting from version 9, is to actually have the standard more focused on risk. So looking at risk, and then from the understanding who wants to do you harm and how can they do you harm, then the requirements will be implemented in the specific areas that are needed to be covered by those requirements, right? So it's no use putting expensive security controls in the areas of the trusted environment that don't need it, because it's just a waste of money and it can actually complicate security as well. So we brought in risk management at level 2, but at level 1, we brought in threat modeling. So that's the first thing, is to actually understand, again, who wants to do you harm and how can they do you harm, and that's threat modeling. But obviously with all this great information, you've worked out your threats, you've worked out the threat actors, the threat vectors, you worked out where your controls are going to be, where your fortifications are going to be in your castle. But the thing there is how do you actually keep track of those controls over a period of time? How do you improve on them? How do you work out where they're actually working? If they need to be implemented, how are you tracking that? And so with level 2, that's where we brought in a risk management requirement. So we apply risk management methodology. So we now track the controls over a period of time using risk management, because in threat modeling, it's not really there to track the effectiveness of those controls over a period of time. And that's where we've introduced risk management at level 2.
So yeah, and risk management applies to quite a few different requirements. Sharnae mentioned that when she was talking about one earlier. As you were talking, Mark, it just like flooded into my mind. This movie is 20 years old, so maybe I'm the only one that saw it 20 years ago. But has anyone else heard of Along Came Polly? It's a movie with Ben Stiller, and he's like a risk assessor, and he can't stop applying it to everything that he looks at because he's so used to assessing risk. And I think that that's kind of when you really get your head into that and are assessing risk, it's easy to see how it applies to the other requirements because you start to just do it naturally within your system. You're paying attention to all those things and assessing it in like a really deep, thoughtful way. And it becomes much easier, I would think, as it goes along and you sort of just naturally apply it to these things. Which is why when you pull out one requirement like Charnay did, if we haven't talked about it yet, it seems like, oh, where are we going with the risk assessment? But when you bring it down to this aspect and recognize that even though it's further down in the standard, it actually applies to a bunch of the other requirements. It's a good way to frame it. Although I would also say you can take it too far. Charnay, did you want to jump in?
No, Jess, I definitely agree with you. I'm always on the risk side. So I'm definitely someone that applies it throughout. And I think it's so important. I don't think it's just certain aspects of the standard that actually you should look from a risk lens. It's actually all the standards. We don't want to just implement requirements and controls like, willy-nilly. Why does that requirement exist? How does that reflect in my operation, and what's actually the risk? Why is CCS saying I should do it? Why is the regulator saying I should do it? We should always take a step back and really make sure that what you then implement is sustainable in the long term, if you look at it from a risk lens. So that's just, my perspective. But sometimes you just need to quickly do something, but important to always go back, evaluate, is this really necessary? Yeah.
Yeah, agreed, for sure. Sorry for the pop culture reference, just wanted to age myself, but yeah, 20 years ago, and I guess I'm still thinking about how risk affects so many walks of life. Okay, and as we know, key compromise is a massive risk that we need to be aware of. So, Charnay, will you talk through our last requirement that we wanted to cover today about key compromise documentation?
Yes, definitely. So the key compromise requirement for level 2 builds on level 1, and builds on level 1, where we talk about a key material inventory for critical keys. And I know this is actually kind of a sensitive topic within the audits because this is not necessarily something that people want to share, but there is a way to sanitize this so it still serves its purpose, but not putting you in a security compromise. So that is a key thing that, I did the same thing as Derek does,
We
like
all
a critical
do
thing that you need to, establish for yourself. So what level 2 now says is not just for critical keys, but for all your key material, because you can't protect what you don't know exists. So I think it's very important to take that step further, to have all your key material like inventoried, not just the critical keys, but also the additional ones, and assess that on an annual or periodic basis, because things in your system might change, processes might change, controls might change. So something that wasn't critical can now suddenly be critical, but it was never on the list. So it's something that just, fell away, and vice versa. What's critical can maybe not be. So I just think it's very important to have that. That's my perspective.
Yeah, well, and the assumption that if something's important, it is always important is not true. So I like that you pointed that out, that things change, you have to keep it updated. And I also like that you addressed that the goal is to make things more secure. Auditors aren't doing things in a way that make the system less secure. They're reviewing evidence to make sure it's there, but not to a point where it would impact the security of the system. So yeah, there are ways to sanitize the data before you're sharing it with others. Okay, what else do we want to say about level 2 before we conclude? Anything that anybody wanted to mention before we end today about level 2 requirements or CCSS in general? We've covered it all. Perfect hour. I mean, that's the goal, right? Maybe we
I'm
did.
just impressed we got through the whole level 2 in an hour. So
I am too. There were only a few requirements we didn't touch on. So we did a really good job here. Thank you guys for joining and for your perspective. I think it's so important that we have these conversations with people who are out there doing the audits, also being part of these systems on the inside. We've got a lot of different perspectives on these calls, which I think is really important. And I think everyone on here has gone through the training to some degree. So we're all on the same page with what it is that we should be doing with these requirements. And I agree, we did a good job. We went through it all, and I really appreciate you guys sharing your expertise with us and, with others who want to watch this. So thank you to our panel for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. And let's do any closing remarks, and then we'll head out. Anything anyone else wants to jump in, or just goodbyes? No one wants to say goodbye. I'll say it on behalf
Just
of everyone.
goodbyes.
All right. Thank you guys for joining. We really
Cheerful.
appreciate it. All right.
Thanks,
See you next
everyone.
time.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Yes.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.